Chernobyl was the biggest nuclear disaster of the 20th century. It paved the way for the outlawing of nuclear technology and has scarred the human race ever since. So, when HBO set out to make a show depicting one of the most covered up and terrifying disasters in human history, they had to make something truly outstanding. Chernobyl was a real historic event, so the writers had to either create a story with what really happened or invent something of their own around the actual disaster. Thankfully, they chose to stick to the real events and science. That's one of the factors that brought the Chernobyl miniseries a real and lasting impact. Instead of writing in something fake, they chose to simply expand on the perspectives of the real people that were actually involved. The show is incredibly historically and scientifically accurate. For example, Valery Legazov was a real scientist who did expose the USSR's cover up of what really happened in Chernobyl. It is thanks to him that we know the surface level truth as well as what really caused the supposedly indestructible RBMK reactor to blow up. I won't go into the details here, but in essence, the Russians had cut a lot of corners when designing the reactor that later revealed a fatal flaw in the failsafe system. It's pretty ironic when you think about it. And the realism goes beyond simple scientific and historical facts. It dives into real human relationships and emotions. For example, Lyudmila Ignatenko, who lost her husband in the accident. Her story arc was incredibly deep and touching, and also shed a light on what really happened to the firefighters as well as their families. What a lot of shows and media in general get wrong is the pacing. Usually, most shows and movies feel either a little too fast or a little too slow, and it is rarely that we get to see flawless pacing. And I think that's exactly what Chernobyl did perfectly, especially considering its niche. Usually, shows and films with bad pacing take their time to build up to the main events. We can see this in shows like Lost, where the main, most important events only happen after you have already lost interest. Chernobyl does not have this problem. In the first 10 minutes of the show, we get to see the reactor explode and the aftermath of the disaster begin to take place, not to mention seeing the main character commit suicide in the first scene. It feels engaging straight away, and because the viewer knows the truth, seeing the characters deny it and learn it as well is incredibly fascinating to see. This may not be necessarily true for everyone, but for viewers who are not generally familiar with the USSR, watching a show set in that part of the world at that point of time deal with something as fearsome as Chernobyl is just perfect. One of the biggest and most important aspects of HBO's Chernobyl is how they decided to tell the story. While usually you get to see events unfold from a pretty subjective point of view, in this show you get to experience the story from various perspectives. Instead of a simple rundown from a third party, we get to be and see what everyone involved had to go through. For example, you get to see the true horror of what the firefighters had to endure through Lyudmila Ignatenko's point of view, or the sheer amount of covering up the state was doing from Legasov's perspective. No matter how important the character was, as long as they experienced a unique part of the disaster, their perspective was shown, from the scientists to the people clearing the irradiated roof. Now, perspective in this case doesn't necessarily mean just the experiences of one individual, but rather just how the viewer experiences the particular story. So, for example, we get to see how the inhabitants of Pripyat saw the explosion and its aftermath. While in general it is told from the subjective view of one woman, it still manages to go further and give the viewer a deeper understanding of what happened. You get to see this lack of information that is given to the civilians and the danger they were in without knowing it. So, this is what the Chernobyl miniseries does perfectly. It gives us all perspectives of the unfolding events in a way that feels continuous and well paced. Another important thing about Chernobyl is the storytelling. While the aspects I mentioned before do fit into that wider theme, there is a lot more to it. The miniseries isn't just a retelling of events. It's a crafted narrative that makes viewers feel the weight of the disaster. The writers take something that could easily be presented as a dry historical documentary and instead weave it into a gripping human drama. They carefully balance technical details with personal stories, so the audience isn't overwhelmed by science, but also never feels like it's been dumbed down. The dialogue is another part of the storytelling strength. It's sharp, minimal, and purposeful. Every line feels intentional, reflecting the seriousness of the situation. Even the silences carry meaning. Moments where characters simply look at what's unfolding are some of the most haunting. One of the most effective choices was how the series often shows rather than tells. Instead of long monologues about the dangers of radiation, we see the consequences through imagery. Graphite on the ground, the sick firefighters, or the roof workers silently throwing their metaphorical death into the reactor. This visual storytelling creates a real and unforgettable impact on the viewer. Lastly, the series has a narrative thread that runs through all perspectives: truth versus lies. Each character, whether a firefighter, a miner, or a party official, is confronted with the cost of denial and the price of honesty. This makes the story not just about a nuclear disaster, but about human nature and the systems we build. For example, hours after the reactor had exploded, the Soviet officers forbade anyone to even suggest that the core had exploded, and the fire was anything more than a malfunctioning hydrogen tank. All because the state always had to be right, even through lies. The theme of truth and lies is one that is present throughout the whole show, not only in matters that concern the state. Even in the hospital, doctors were lying about the effects of radiation on people, or the people who were lying to each other and pretending that everything was fine. With this continuing narrative, the show shed a lot of light on what it was really like in the Soviet dreamland. They managed to perfectly show how badly the Soviets messed up and how. In the end, the reason this disaster happened was because of their own lies and hubris. The Chernobyl miniseries also, in a way, referenced a lot from the book 1984, where the themes of truth and lies are ever so present. In the book 1984, written by George Orwell, we get to explore the meaning and importance of the truth. Oceania, the fictional totalitarian socialist state where 1984 was set, had a government which lied constantly. They lied to the point where the lies became the truth, and this is the exact same theme that was explored in the Chernobyl miniseries. In just 5 episodes, they managed to shed light on various themes that went way deeper than most other media covering the disaster. The show had scene after scene depicting people who were trying to achieve the truth getting suppressed by authority and its lies. One of the most important reasons for why the miniseries is timeless and quite unforgettable is its theme. The show is historically accurate, which gives it meaning and purpose beyond just being enjoyable. It tells a story that actually happened to a great detail and accuracy. Perhaps not down to every minute detail, but definitely more accurately than any old boring history teacher will retell it. And as I mentioned before, it delves way deeper than just the historical facts. It will forever be a commentary on the importance of truth and honesty. I think the fact that Legasov actually existed and that he is the reason we get to know the truth gives the miniseries even more meaning. It is a kind of tribute to his life and his actions, because he could have just as easily not told anyone what he knew, or have tried and failed, but he didn't. And not only him, it sheds light on all people who suffered and the ones who gave their life to save others. Though, to be honest, the show does include Ignatenko, who still lives today, and who stated clearly that she did not want to be included in the show, and because of the show, she was harassed by the media later on. So the mini-series is not without controversy or without problems in general. Personally, I remember going into the show with low expectations. I knew it was going to be okay, but I didn't think it was going to be anything to write home about. I had these low expectations purely because most other media I had seen surrounding this topic was pretty uninteresting and something that never stuck with me. Another factor was that everyone was praising it, and while that may sound like a good thing from personal experience, the media and the internet in general has the ability to praise pretty mediocre media just because it makes them feel smart or more sophisticated. While I do not want to step on any toes, my best example of this would be Taxi Driver, a movie that is highly praised, though for me it's impossible to watch. So, coming into the show, my expectations were very low, and from the first 10 minutes, I knew I had been wrong. Chernobyl miniseries had managed to make something that truly stood out from the rest, and I will be honest, it taught me a lot more about what happened then than any documentary, movie, or article had ever managed to do. That's why I call it a timeless masterpiece, because long after the details fade, the lessons about truth, lies, and the cost of denial will still resonate. So, those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think about Chernobyl in the comment section down below. And if you like videos covering movies, shows, books, and video games, feel free to check out my other videos. Live long and prosper.